What were you doing up in Bend?
Just one of my friends has a place up there, so go up there and golf and mountain bike, and
Oh, nice.
it's kind of just a change of scenery from Southern Cal.
Yeah. I've been up there mountain biking a few times.
It's great.
Yeah. Well, it's depends on your level of interest and ability.
Yeah.
I've been with my son who just likes to rock it down runs, and I don't enjoy that so much. But
That's correct. I mean, I don't do it a whole lot, and they have bikes up there, so I just borrow a bike. But I went to a local bike store, and they said that everything is back ordered until like April because people are just buying up outdoor activity items.
Yeah.
Nuts.
Yeah, I drove by a bike store here in San Francisco the other day, and there was a big line outside. Apparently, it's very difficult to even find a bike now.
Yeah, it's insane.
Under $3,000. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I went to a bike store yesterday, and the only one they had was a Trek that was like 4,500, and I'm like, it's a little too steep for me as a beginner.
Yeah. I just bought a used bike from
Craigslist.
My neighborhood. Yeah, it's not a great one, but I'm a beginner. I'm sort of beginning again too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's fine, just a mountain bike, $300. It was some kid who outgrew it. So
nice.
Yeah.
Lucy, are you going to be doing formal introductions of everybody?
Yeah, once we get started, I'll
Okay.
introduce everyone.
Okay, great. Thanks. And I see Haley is on, who I know. How are you doing, Haley?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. That trip to Irvine was one of the last ones I took pre-COVID.
Oh, yes.
I don't think
That
I've
was
been
right
on
before everything.
Yeah, not sure I've been on a plane since then.
Good morning, everybody.
Hey, Jeff.
Wolf, do you have a glass of port going already?
I have some green tea.
Oh.
Green tea sounds great for such a cloudy morning today.
So Lucy, I was thinking that maybe you and Tricia can decide when we have a critical mass of people who've signed on, and then we'll take your cue
Looks like 19 people have signed on so far. At the moment from my calendar, it says that 26 people have RSVP'd. So maybe let's give it another minute and then we can start.
Thank you.
Can you all see my welcome slide?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I think we've got a critical mass, Jeff.
Okay, great. Thank you. So welcome all to our kickoff meeting. We're looking forward to getting everybody on the same page so we can officially launch our clinical study. And thanks to Tricia and Lucy for putting together a very comprehensive program today. So I was going to spend a few minutes. My name is Jeff Lotes. I'm the PI of this grant. I was going to spend a few minutes at the beginning just to provide some context for the study and describe the overall background of the project and the different aspects of our research program. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
Okay, so we have, the way our center is set up is there are a number of cores, and these cores are meant to provide access to resources for a central research project. The administrative core is led by myself, Connor O'Neill, Des McCoglin, Jake Williams, and Daniel Davis. There's a biobehavioral core led by Wolf Mailing, Irita Stringo next. The clinical core led by Connor O'Neill, along with Patricia Zhang, Sibel Devrin, Praveen, and Aaron Scheffler. We have a pathophysiology core led by Aaron Fields and Roland Krug. Next slide. A physical function and biomechanics core led by Jeannie Bailey, Luke, Rob Matthews, Robin Sun, and an informatics core led by Atul Butte and Tom Peterson. Next slide. The coordinating center is a central component of laying out our clinical study and aggregating our data. This is led by Dennis Black, Tricia Hugh, Lucy Wu, Carolyn Navy, John Lynch, and Felix Liu. We have at UCSF, Connor, Patricia, Praveen, Rochelle, and Sarah Ringling. Next slide, please. At UC Davis, Scott Fishman, and the research coordinators, Edward, Lindsay, and Katrina. Next slide. And at UC Irvine, Dr. Shaw, Daniel Chow, and Haley is a clinical research coordinator. Next slide. And at UC San Diego, Mark Wallace is the lead investigator, along with Joel Castellanos and Katie Lamb. Next slide. So this is an overview of the project, so you understand the various aspects and how they're all meant to be coming together. Next slide. So the HEAL initiative is, as you know, funded through Congress to address the opioid epidemic. And the main overarching goal for HEAL is understanding treatment, understanding pain mechanisms and developing better ways to develop management that doesn't involve addictive drugs. Next slide. Because back pain is the greatest non-cancer reason why patients end up getting prescribed opioids, there's a carve out within the HEAL initiative for a national consortium to address chronic low back pain called BACPAC. And so the overarching goals of Backpack are to aggregate data those data will be collected with some traditional and novel measures, and those data will then be analyzed with some advanced analytics. The goal to develop phenotypes that are responsive to treatments. There's a series of observational studies that are being funded in addition to a planned interventional trial in approximately 2 years. Next study, please. Next slide, please. So the Backpack program has 13 total grants that are funded. There's a data coordinating center at the University of North Carolina. There's 3 what are called mechanistic research centers. One that's centered here at UCSF that is including all of you. There's one at the University of Pittsburgh and one at the University of Michigan. And the goal of these mechanistic research centers is to enroll and deep phenotype patients with chronic low back pain. And the goal is that data from all 3 sites will be aggregated at the data coordinating center, and then those data be available for some cross Backpack phenotyping. And those data also will be used as kind of a baseline for the interventional trial, which is currently being designed. Next slide, please. The premise of Backpack is to adopt the biopsychosocial model. So we're looking at patients from all aspects, looking at pathophysiological factors, social factors, psychological factors. And this will be the first time where all of these are integrated in a comprehensive way to customize treatments to individual patients. Next slide, please. The patient-centric aspect of this is being addressed on a number of fronts. We have our own patient shareholder group that we're interfacing with. There's going to be a cross-Backpack stakeholder group, and a number of the features that we've been integrated in this trial are focused on patient preference. Next slide. As I mentioned, the cores are meant to, and the data coming from the cores are meant to support a central research project. Our research project has 3 aims. The first aim we're in the middle of now, which is to validate novel tools in the 3 domains of the biopsychosocial model. The goal of those tools would be to become integrated into our observational study and add additional quantitative information that can be useful for phenotyping. And so I'll talk briefly about what some of those tools are. The second aim is to develop methods for assessing individualized or patient preferences for treatment outcomes so that we can make sure there's alignment with expectations both from the provider and the patient. And then the third aim is to use traditional and novel analytics to analyze data we'll be collecting for the purpose of developing phenotypes. And there's been cross Backpack effort to standardize the data we'll be collecting so that this can be done both within the MRCs, but then across MRCs as data is aggregated throughout the consortium. Next slide, please. So the cores I mentioned are biobehavioral, pathophysiology, biomechanical. Those technical cores align with the biopsychosocial model, and the bioinformatics core provides the analytics expertise, and the clinical core provides the data. Next slide. The biobehavioral core, as I mentioned, is being led by Wolf Maley and Irina Strigo, and here the goal is to use both traditional and novel measures to capture aspects of the patient's psychological factors that influence a patient's pain experience. Next slide. So these include self-report questionnaires, quantitative sensory testing, and both fMRI and brain anatomy measurements that together we believe will help us better characterize patients' central processing for pain, which will be important for characterizing central versus peripheral inputs to their pain experience. Next slide, please. The pathophysiology core is using primarily imaging techniques. Next slide. There's a number of novel measures that we'll be talking about over the course of the day that are meant to assess things beyond traditional MRI imaging, things like bone marrow composition, paraspinal muscle quality, intervertebral disc quality, which have some precedent for importance in assessing patient risk factors. There's the ability to assess tissues that may be collected from surgery if patients go on to have surgery, and we'll be collecting a serum, which will be used for assessing biomarkers, both genetic and protein biomarkers that may assess inflammatory status and things of that nature. Next slide, please. The biomechanical core is meant to assess how patients move and how those movements may both provide signals on their phenotype and also their pain experience. Next slide. These biomechanical measures include wearable sensors that assess how patients are moving over the course of their day. There's a depth camera measures that allow us to assess total body movement in the clinic and evaluate postural stability and coordination along the kinetic chain from the trunk to the ankles, and then sensors that are attached to the body for some more detailed assessment of movement parameters. Next slide, please. And the bioinformatics core provides a number of aspects. Next slide. So as you know, all of the patients will be enrolling are part of UC Health, so they'll have access to their electronic health record data. So the goal of the informatics core is to facilitate bringing those electronic health record data along into an analysis engine that includes, some traditional and advanced and analytic approaches, so that we can combine the new measures we'll be collecting through the various technical cores with traditional questionnaires and electronic health record data. And these, very disparate types of data, we're going to require some sophisticated approaches, the goal of which is to help us better understand what are the factors that are, for individual patients, maximally contributing to their pain experience, and how those might allow us to be smarter about matching them to a successful treatment. Next slide, please. And the clinical core, we're going to have two cohorts, and I think we're going to have, let's go to the next slide. I think we're going to have Connor walk through the protocols and the study designs for the two clinical cores.
I think, Tricia, you're actually doing this part, aren't you?
No, the study overview, that's you.
Oh, okay, sorry.
But I just wanted to check, does anyone have any, this is Tricia Hugh from the Coordinating Center. Does anyone have any questions to start with before we get into the nitty gritty?
I was just wondering, will we be able to get a copy of these slides for our own reference?
Yes, so all of them will be available. When our study website is up, we'll have them all posted, but because they're all super large and it's hard to send out by email. So we'll have them
For sure.
on the website, and we'll let you know when those are available.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, and something else that may be useful at some point, we've had, as part of our AIM-1, this validation plan, we have our cores who've been updating our internal executive committee on the progression of these different analysis approaches. And so as you see what those are over the course of the day, there's data behind that get at what the actual measurements that are going to be collected through those assessments, how those measurements have been validated in terms of reproducibility and reliability, and then also where the signals are for potential clinical utility. How do we think these the data we extract from these measures are going to have value in informing our assessment about individual patients. Another backpack-wide effort has been to develop a theoretical model of back pain, which is a kind of a conceptual construct for how data flowing in from the clinical assessments are important for various domains of patient risk, and those domains have primarily been identified by historical context and expert opinion, et cetera. So we will be working to use data we'll be collecting to validate this theoretical construct that has hopefully some underlying mechanistic understanding of how the variables, what they mean about why the patients are in pain and what that meaning might tell us about what the optimum treatment would be. And that linkage between the measures and the mechanistic treatment that could be optimal is what was really meant to be tested in the interventional trial that's, as I mentioned, is just being designed as we speak.
Yeah, Jeff, I think before we dive into the study overviews, it may be useful for you to give a little bit of more background actually about the data coordinating center and the steering committee and sort of how some of the processes and structural things that have been put in place, impact what we do in our studies, what some of our choices are, et cetera.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Connor. Yeah, so the Data Coordinating Center, as I mentioned, is it's a large U24 grant at the University of North Carolina, and they, their role is to really establish connectivity and collaboration across the consortium. And a big effort that we all have been involved with is harmonizing data elements, getting an agreement about what data will be collected that kind of strikes the balance between, overburdensome versus sufficient for what we hope to accomplish in terms of deep phenotyping. So there's been, I think, approximately 15 working groups that were set up to standardize imaging protocols for both the spine and the brain. There's a clinical management committee that's been focused on aspects of the study design. The goal here is that there's a consensus across BACPAC that we're collecting the most valuable information, and that that information is collected in a way that can be aggregated. So at the end of the day, that we hope to have approximately 400 in-clinic patient assessments. There's I think approximately 1,000 that are anticipated at Pittsburgh and around 900, I think, at the University of Michigan. And so the goal would be that all of these data are aggregated so that the more that we can be collecting the same information, the better. So that's taken a huge amount of effort and has led to some of our delays in kind of getting rolling in terms of establishing IRB and finalizing protocols and making sure that we're going to have to change things midstream. Are there other aspects, Connor, that you might want to add?
No, I think, yeah, I think it's important to recognize that there's different layers to the data we're collecting. Much of it is not something we have any control over. It's really been sort of decided by this larger group. So there's we'll be going through some of these in more detail later, some of these questionnaires, and there may be things that don't make a whole lot of sense necessarily, but we sort of have to comply with these different layers. One is the HEAL. So every study that's in HEAL, that's funded through HEAL, has a certain set of minimum data elements. Then there's every study that's funded through BACPAC, which includes not only these MRCs we're talking about today, but also I think a total of, how many different sites are there, Jeff, with all the different tech sites? And
yeah, there's a total of 13.
Yeah, so there's 10 other sites that are doing studies of various kinds. They're not these big observational studies that we're doing, but they are clinical studies. And so there's a set of data elements that have to be collected for that purpose. And then there's an additional layer that relates to the MRCs that Jeff discussed that we're a part of. We're one of these mechanistic research centers. So there's it's a pretty complex enterprise, I would say, and that has definitely led to some delays. In addition, obviously, to COVID, which none of us were anticipating. But I think we're now at the point where we're ready to start recruiting, and I think we're super excited about getting started. So there's not any other questions anyone has before I do the study overviews? Any questions at all? Okay.
One other point I'll just address just to mention that there are the Data Coordinating Center. It has a separate set of funds that are being set aside for this interventional trial. which we'll be trying to exercise algorithms and refine algorithms and look at treatment response, et cetera. And then there's also separate funds for ancillary projects that are, that come up that are were maybe out of scope of original applications, but there's a growing agreement that these are central to achieving backpack goals. And so there are opportunities to try to continue to enhance collaboration across our resource center that includes UCSF and our rolling sites. So we can continue to keep you all in the loop on terms of what's happening in that respect. But we hope that our interactions will be more than just data sharing, but there'll be some additional research collaborations that will develop from this work.
Yeah, I think that's a that's a really important point, is that we do really want to turn this into a very collaborative effort. People have ideas for new studies or different ways to analyze the data that we're going to be collecting. Of course, we all want to be very open to all that.
There's one other, I'm sorry, Con, one of the last things. So there's a publications committee that Dennis Black is part of, and that publications committee is developing some consortium-wide processes for accessing data and publishing data. We have a REACH publications policy, which is similar. So the as we aggregate our data internally and then send those data to the DAC, we hope to be publishing along the way. And so as you have ideas about potential studies that could publish aspects of our observations, we want to engage you all in communicating with our publications committee so that we're the DAC and backpack are all kind of comfortable with the language, and we're trying to standardize what we call things, and the language that comes out of publications from backpack is something that there's some sensitivity to.
Can you, I'm sorry, did you, what is the DAC? Is that the overarching database of like the University of Michigan's, the UC systems, and every one?
Yeah, I'm sorry. The DAC is this data aggregating coordinating center at the University of North Carolina. So they're kind of the operational drumbeat here. So we have a lot of communication, primarily through MS Teams as a collaborative portal, and with the data coordinating center that facilitates these working groups, these ancillary funds. Obviously NIH program staff are intimately involved in all these conversations, but they're the site where all of our data ultimately flows, and then from there into the larger HEAL repository. So they're the kind of the gatekeepers. And one of the the things that we all want to be being thoughtful about going forward is that we develop a common language about aspects of back pain, so that let's say a paper comes out of UCSF, it doesn't create a dilemma for those at the University of Michigan or Pittsburgh. So I think the language we use and the way that it relates to the biopsychosocial model and other aspects of back pain is something that there's some consortium-wide sensitivity to.
Okay, I think we can go on to the study. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Can I just say something real quick? This is Dennis. I'm the representative from the UC, our UC group on the publications committee. And I just think it might be of interest to the people, the UC group as a group, the way the publications are organized. If we have something that will only use our data that we're collecting within this one MRC, then we have a lot of latitude to write publications on our own. Things that we want to aggregate data from University of Michigan and Pittsburgh and other sites, then we have to go through the DAC, and it's going to be a little more bureaucratic. But if you guys, as we go along, if we think of things that we want to do, I think that's up to all of us as a group to do that on our own.
That's great. Thanks, Dennis.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we'll do study overviews. Next slide. So I think as Jeff already basically discussed in his presentation, the our main objective is to do deep phenotyping of chronic low back patients. And I think one thing that's, I'd say, challenge that we have in our consortium is that we have a very expansive definition of deep phenotyping that includes functional MRI scans, QST, a very comprehensive battery of psychosocial questionnaires, and a very long period of follow-up out to 3 years, actually. Whereas the other MRCs are collecting a smaller number of MRI scans and QST measures and things like that. They're using a strategy where they're basically doing, it's almost a convenience sample of their total cohort that they're doing these more advanced measures on. And we're taking a different approach where we're doing a deeper phenotyping on a larger number of patients, a smaller number of patients for a longer period of time. So that does, make recruitment and more importantly, retention more challenging. But that's, we have a lot of strategies in place that we hope we can leverage to achieve our goals. Next slide. So we have 2 studies. One is called Come Back, and the other is Back Home. So Come Back is sort of the major focuses of what we'll be discussing today. It's a longitudinal cohort study. Patients with chronic low back pain. We'll go through the inclusion and exclusion criteria later. As you all know, we have 4 clinical sites, and we're aiming to get data on a total of 400 patients. The study visit flow, I think Tricia will go into a little more detail later, but basically it's a baseline clinic visit with some check-ins at several intervals, some of that driven by requirements of heel and backpack, phone visits at 3, 6, 18, and 30 months, and then the major, time-intensive clinic visits occurring at baseline month 12, 24, and 36. So that's our goal, is to get 3 years of very rich data on this cohort of patients. The other study we have, which is actually really interesting and timely, as it turns out, is Back Home. And this is an e-cohort study that leverages a platform that's been developed here at UCSF called Eureka. This was a platform that was developed several years ago to facilitate a cardiovascular research study called Health eHeart. And it's everything is done digitally, so there's no in-person visits. It's obviously heavily weighted towards patient self-report measures, but within Health eHeart, they've also linked to a variety of remote sensors, some of them obvious like Fitbit, but they've also branched out into blood pressure monitoring and things like that. So it's a really interesting approach to doing clinical research, because it allows you to get a lot of data, not as structured as some of the data we're used to getting in clinical trials, but the numbers are pretty huge. I think Health eHeart has several 100,000 patients. They may be up to 1 million now. They just a few months ago started a COVID study, and they already have 35,000 patients over just a few months. So it's an interesting approach that we're going to hopefully learn more about on its use in low back pain. So our goals are relatively modest. We're trying to recruit 3,000 patients for this e-cohort. There's a little bit of work that has to be done at the sites for recruitment, but it's pretty minimal. And I think Trisha's going to go through that later. Is that right, Tricia?
Right. We'll go through this, girl.
Oh,
yeah, just a bit.
Okay, great. So I won't go into that now. But we're taking an approach where in addition to the questionnaire data, we're also going to be getting EHR data on all these patients. So it allows for, some pretty robust data set actually that will complement our traditional cohort. The other thing that's interesting about this back home study, the e-cohort, is that there's a lot of digital interventions out there now. And we are actively looking at ways to incorporate these digital interventions into the trial. I was just on the phone this morning with AJ Wasan from Pittsburgh. They have an app, for example, they're using that they're interested in studying. So if any of you are into digital type things and want to have some proposal related to that, this would be the time, because we're just starting to sort of make formal plans for incorporating those things into back home. Next slide. So just to go through the inclusion criteria, again, these are criteria that are harmonized across all backpacks. So people may have different opinions about what constitutes low back pain, but this is what we have to work with. So it's basically a self-report of chronic low back pain, and that's a definition that's coming off of the NIH research standards that were developed several years ago now. And it's pain that's been there for at least 3 months and has had resulted in pain at least 50% of the days in the past 6 months. So again, one could argue about what the definition of pain is, but that's chronic pain, that's what we have. We also, a lot of these patients have multi-site pain, but we want to restrict our study to patients that their worst pain is in the lower back. So that's another very important inclusion criteria. The rest of these are, I would say, fairly obvious. We want people that are, going to be around for at least a couple of years, that are going to comply with the study and provide informed consent, et cetera. Next slide. I think that's the same slide, isn't it? Oh, that's back home. I'm sorry. So yeah, back home it's basically the same. The only difference is that they have to have access to the internet, obviously, and some type of a device that allows them to comply with the study. Next slide. Exclusion criteria basically is a contraindication to MRI. They're pretty standard. We want to restrict our population to non-specific low back pain. It's sort of interesting that some of the MRCs had very few exclusion criteria, including they weren't excluding patients with cancer or connective tissue diseases, et cetera. But we've decided to, basically use the standard sort of definition of non-specific low back pain and exclude patients with tumors, infections, and inflammatory pain, et cetera. So those are all, I think, fairly straightforward. And then there's some other minor ones. Again, we want to be people that can be staying around for a couple of years. The pregnancy, again, trying to restrict our population to those with non-specific low back pain. And then we really cannot accommodate anything except English language speakers. Number 12, I think, is a little bit interesting. I don't think it's going to be an issue for most sites, but there may be a concern if patients are enrolling in another study of a device or some kind of drug that would interfere with the backpack study. And maybe I can just do an informal poll of Scott and Shalini and Joel, if you guys have any studies ongoing or planned that you think may in some way target the same population and potentially interfere with the back home or comeback, sorry.
Not at UCSD.
We don't have any at UC Irvine. No, no competing studies.
Okay.
And Scott said in the text, not for us.
Great. So number 12 is a non-issue. Okay, next slide,
Oh,
please.
Before you go on, sorry, I just wanted to mention really quickly about inclusion criteria number 11. This is Trisha. The reason why we are only enrolling people who are able to read and write the English language is because many of the questionnaires that we're using in the study are validated in English, and we don't have the ability to have them translated and then back translated and do the whole validation procedure. So unfortunately, we are restricted to enroll only those with the English language. And even if your site has a translator, we really prefer that the participant fill those forms out on their own because they're meant to be self-administered. So I just wanted to explain why number 11 was there, in case anybody has questions about that. Okay.
Great. So any other questions about the inclusion or exclusion criteria or the study overview in general?
Just for the exclusion criteria for the radiculopathy, they have to have weakness with that. Like they can have some referral of their back pain, correct?
Exactly. So the radiculopathy we're defining as a functional motor deficit of less than 4/5.
Great, thanks.
Okay, next slide. Back home is the same exclusion criteria essentially. Next slide. So just going through the study flow in brief, looking over here on the left-hand side of the screen, we see the baseline enrollment visit. So this consists of eligibility screening, consent obviously, the physical function exam, which we're going to be going through in some detail here. The MRI studies, there's a little bit of difference between the sites related to which MRI studies will be done based on the capabilities at the site. But at least there's a possibility of a patient getting a clinical MRI. Well, all patients will get a clinical MRI actually, but there's what we call advanced MRI, which is some special sequences that I think Aaron Fields is going to talk about later. There's MR spectroscopy, and then there's functional brain imaging. There's a QST, and luckily, in my opinion, the consortium took a sort of a minimalist approach to the QST. So we're going to be basically just doing pressure pain thresholds, the neuropan for temporal summation, and then a water bath. So we don't need the super expensive thermodes and $30,000 machines and so on. So that's a relief. Biological specimens. This actually has been one of the biggest issues that's causing delay in that all the different entities that do biologic specimen collection and processing have been overwhelmed by COVID issues, but seems like we have that ironed out and we're going to be able to move forward with that. And then we have our core questionnaires and our biobehavioral questionnaires, and I think those are pretty straightforward. I think everyone here is going to be, very familiar with these questionnaires, and if not, at least the underlying domain that they're addressing. Next slide. So then the month 3 visit, this is something we were not anticipating initially when we designed the study, but it was inserted at the, I think it was HEAL actually that requires this, that they have a month 3, and this will just be via phone and email where they answer some of the core questionnaires, so no other data collected other than self-report. There are also some other briefer check-ins. This is something that was added recently by, I can't remember who added that. Was that Backpack, Trisha, or was that the MRCs?
That was Backpack.
Okay, so that's another one of these things that Backpack as a consortium said that you guys have to do this, so we we have to throw this in here. Unfortunately, it's a very short questionnaire that can be answered by email, so it shouldn't be too big of a burden. Next slide. And then the month 6 visit is again a phone/email contact that basically involves just questionnaires, and will be at the 6th, 18th, and 30-month intervals. Next slide. And then the yearly intervals are where we do the deep dive on, again, remeasuring physical function, collecting specimens, doing MRI scans, at least at the 24-month time point. Any questions about the study flow? We're going to be going into this in a lot more detail, so this is just a sort of a high-level overview of how things will flow. This all seems crystal clear. Okay, good. Next slide. So this is a more detailed description, and this is probably not the right moment to go through all this in detail. Tricia, unless you wanted to
Oh,
do
no.
a deep dive on this now, or?
I think we just wanted to emphasize that we are collecting a lot of data. So
Yeah.
there's like 3 of these slides. And just to give you the idea of the depth of data that we are collecting in this study, and we'll be working very closely with all of the sites to help you along with this. We understand that it's arduous, and working with the participants for such a long day in the clinic for the clinic visits. We'll try our best to help you manage the visit flow and make this as easy as possible on both of you and the participants.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a good illustration of just how the depth of data we're going to be collecting, which seems in some respects overwhelming, but on the other hand, it's such an opportunity to really characterize on many different levels patients with low back pain. So it's definitely ambitious, but if we can pull it off, it's going to be a huge step forward for the whole field. Next slide. So this again, more of the same. This sort of just provides the biobehavioral questionnaires, and obviously we'll be giving a lot more detail about all those. Next slide. The physical function, Sarah Ringling's going to go over QST. We have some information about that. I think that's actually pretty straightforward. The spine imaging, we're going to have a whole section about that today on the spine imaging. Way down at the bottom there is EHR data collection. That's something we're still sort of figuring out the mechanics around that. It's UC has an ambition of having all EHR data being available in one sort of location for the entire UC system. That hasn't happened yet. And so there's going to be some complexities around collecting the EHR data that we're going to have to work through, and that's sort of an evolving process.
So we're working with the Office of the President right now, and then after this meeting and after we talk to them, the UC-wide, we'll be contacting each of your sites, and I'll be meeting with probably the study coordinators first to start figuring out how we can work within your organization to get this data to us. So we should have more information in the next week or so, and then I'll be meeting with each of your sites individually.
Next slide. So now we'll shift into back home, and this excuse me, this is something that it's still evolving a little bit. We actually haven't started programming yet, but basically the concept is that we're asking patients to fill out more or less the same questionnaires that we're doing in our main cohort study. We have stripped out a few that have some maybe a questionable value, or at least are on the margins. And these are presented to patients in modules, and each module is introduced with sort of a brief overview of why we're asking these questions, because sometimes people they might, I think they wonder why the heck are they asking me about depression? I'm not depressed. And this is really based on the Healthy Heart format, where they give some explanations to patients as they go through while they're being asked various things about their cardiovascular health and so on. Next slide. I think we can skip over that. It's basically just the questionnaires that we're going to be using. So this is an example of how this flow is going to be sort of presented to patients, giving them some context for why they're being asked about, for example, anxiety and depression. Next slide. Similar type thing. Next slide. There's a lot of data on there. I think the only point there is that they're going to be getting touches at various time points out to 36 months, which at the shorter intervals will be brief, and at longer interval at the yearly visits will be a little more comprehensive. So similar concept as with the main cohort study with Comeback. Next slide. This is again back home. I think we can advance through that. That's I think more or less covered in the previous slides. Just that there's a lot of questionnaires, but not quite as many as with Backpack. I'm sorry, as with Comeback. Next slide. Okay, I think this is where we transition to Tricia. I just want to mention, real briefly that this is a ton of work. We totally understand that, and we are completely at your service to, if there's any issues, any things that come up that aren't working right, or things that we can do, please, engage. And we anticipate having a lot of conversations, both at the, with CRCs, with investigators, with anybody that is involved with your site. We definitely want to make it as easy as possible, and we're willing to do whatever we feasibly can to do that.
Connor, I thought one other point just to raise is that the front end of the funnel for these patients is going to be an electronic health record, a search for those who are in the UC system that meet our definition of inclusion exclusion. And I don't know if Tricia, you want to mention briefly about how we made.
We have some slides to go over that if you want to chime in at that time.
Great, thank you.
Okay, great.
Any other questions at all before we shift over to Tricia? Okay.
Okay. We just wanted to start with, I know we've been talking about this, all the players that are involved, but it's fairly extensive. And to give you an idea of all the input that we're getting and why sometimes we're doing some of these measures and, it may not, seem obvious to you, but there are specific reasons. All right, next, Lucy. Thanks. So just to give you an idea, our main participating units for the Comeback and the Back Home studies are our REACH cores, which Jeff presented today. And within our clinical core, we have a UCSF coordinating center. So that's the coordinating center that's specifically for Back Home and Comeback. The data coordinating center that we were talking about earlier is the entire data coordinating center for the Backpack Consortium. So when we refer to the CC here, within our studies, we're referring to our coordinating center at UCSF. Of course, the 4 clinical sites at UCSF, Irvine, Davis, and San Diego. We also have a steering committee and observational monitoring board. I'll just briefly go over these in a minute. Patient advisory board, and our funder is NIAMS. All right, next. So as we described earlier, the role of the REACH course is to really give us the scientific direction for our entire REACH project, and that trickles down into our comeback and back home studies. Within our admin core, those are the, like Desba or Jake or Daniel, you may have been interacting with them already with regards to your clinical site contracting and eventually for invoicing. Okay, next. Within the coordinating center, just to give you an idea of who you may be talking to in the future about, you know, any of the study things that you're doing for comeback or back home. It's this group of people. I won't make you memorize our names right now, but eventually you'll get to know us. Next. And our role at the coordinating center is to really manage the study. So we're developing the protocols with and managing implementation with you, training and monitoring, you know, study flow, recruitment, all of the data collection tasks. We're developing all of the study materials, and eventually we'll be working on data analyses as with the informatics core. And we do the reporting for the observational study monitoring board. We'll be working with the study committee, steering committee, and the patient advisory board coordination. And we're also managing the entire REACH data warehouse management. So all of the data that you collect at your sites will be flowing into our data warehouse. All right, next. So I'm not going to go over this in depth, but just to give you an idea, Connor briefly went into this. For the comeback study, the data will be collected at each of your clinical sites and then flow directly to the UCSF coordinating center, where we'll be, you know, managing daily completeness checks, consistency, and we'll be communicating with you with regards to data queries. For the comeback study, the participants do direct data collection directly onto the Eureka system. It's an online website. So your sites will not need to be involved with data collection for back home at all, if that wasn't clear already. And then from the Eureka mobile health system, it comes back into the coordinating center, and then we'll be managing that data in the data warehouse also. So at no point does the back home data flow to and from the clinical sites. There's just, other than the EHR data that we're hoping to be able to collect from your, you know, your UC systems that you're associated with. Okay, next. So I think we introduced this at the very beginning, but just want to go reiterate, for comeback, we have 4 clinical sites led by these individuals. And then, yeah, next. And so for comeback, the clinical site role, I think is, you know, you're very familiar with it. It's the usual thing. We are using a central IRB for this study. We're going to be using WERB, Western IRB. Some of you may be familiar with it. And all of your universities have a master agreement with WERB already set up. So it should be fairly easy for us to set up reliance agreements. There's already an established way with each of your IRBs. And I'll be working with you individually after this meeting on those reliance agreement setups. At UCSF in general, when we request a reliance agreement, it's taking about 2 to 3 weeks on the outside at this moment. So I'm hoping it's about the same timeline for your studies. I mean, for your institutions. For recruitment for both of the studies, we're hoping to be able to work with you, as we mentioned, and we'll go into this a little bit more in just a bit, about pulling, you know, mailing lists from within your institution, and then we'll be sending those, you know, contacting those people in various ways. For the comeback study, we're hoping each of your sites enroll 100 participants, and then perform baseline and follow-up visits on all those people as per our protocol. And then for the back home study, the thing that we do need your help with is, as soon as somebody enrolls online, we're unable to pull the medical record number for if somebody is, for example, a Davis patient. Unfortunately, here at UCSF, we're unable to access the MRNs. So we'll have the names and the contact information for all these people, and we'll know that they are, like, a patient at Davis or a patient at San Diego, because that's part of our questionnaire process. But we'll need your help, and we'll be contacting, your study coordinator, for example, when a new person enrolls from Davis, and asking them to look up the MRN and then communicating that back to us. So that'll be part of what we submit to the IRB for permission for you to be able to transfer that data to us. Okay, next. So I just want to emphasize the role of the study coordinator and comeback, who is the, for those of you who are the coordinators that are on the call today, you'll be the, primary contact with these study participants. And we're looking at long-term follow-up. We're hoping to get, up to 36 months of follow-up for a lot of these people. So that means hopefully building a relationship with everybody, so people look forward to coming back into the study, getting contacted by you, and enjoy being a part of the comeback study and making this an experience. This really helps, we found, to assist with retention over the years. Otherwise, we start seeing a lot of dropouts in the first year, and people just don't want to be contacted anymore. So we're really relying heavily on our study coordinators to be able to establish these relationships, and anything that we can do at the coordinating center to help you out with that, please let us know. We're always available to talk things out. And then the other thing that, as Connor mentioned earlier, is as part of your day-to-day tasks, you'll be helping out with the recruitment for comeback and contacting patients within your institution, but also be, having awareness for competing studies. And, if there is, many times when we have competing studies here at UCSF, we'll talk to the other investigators and kind of create an algorithm about who can be the first person to contact them. And many times it just depends on who has the enrollment goal that we need to reach first. So if somebody needs to reach their enrollment goal by January, and then the next person, the next study, their enrollment goal deadline is June, then we work with all the investigators within our departments to first enroll everybody into the January study, and then we'll tackle the June study. So I encourage you to work with the investigators or the other study coordinators that you have within your departments if there are competing studies. Okay, next. For the steering committee, all of the clinical sites will have membership on the steering committee. So this is the back home and the comeback steering committee. And anytime we have protocol amendments, we'll be running it by the steering committee first prior to implementing it and sending it for IRB approval. So our steering committee will be heavily involved throughout the next 3 years with regards to monitoring study flow and recruitment, making suggestions and working on strategies for that, and also eventually participating in publication and authorship. Okay, next. So we have an observational monitoring board that was assembled by NIAMS. It's a diverse group of people, and we've had one meeting to date, but their role is to really look at ongoing data collection and make suggestions with regards to recruitment if appropriate, but safeguard the safety and the validity of our data, and as well as the burden on our study participants. The next. We also have an assembled patient advisory board, which is made up of a combination of chronic low back pain patients and patients, community members of the community, culturally diverse community, who are also, just in general medical patients, and giving us their perspective. So we've had 2 meetings to date. We have another one coming up in October, but their charge is to help us strengthen our project by enhancing recruitment and retention. We're hoping to get a lot of good advice from them in the future as we, move along, and to get, some advice on how to, really reach a diverse population and get to the entirety of a chronic low back pain population. Next. All right. Does anyone have any questions right now on the players before we move into recruitment and timelines? Great. I see a comment from Shalini about having being encouraging of the advisory board. Thank you. Okay, we can go next. So just briefly, we're going to go over our recruitment goals for each of our sites, our startup timeline, a little bit about our study websites, just to tell you what's coming. And then Connor will hit on recruitment strategies and some ideas we have for COVID-19 considerations based on our limited experience over the past 2 months in other studies. And then a little bit about retention and early termination and how to avoid it. Next. So again, for comeback, our study-wide enrollment goal is 400. So we're hoping to get at least 100 at each of the 4 sites. We've revised our recruitment goal based on sort of what we've seen in the COVID-19 era. You know, the studies that were enrolling pre-COVID and post-COVID have reduced about, you know, anywhere from 33 to 50% of their enrollment capacity based on interest from the participants and just, and then the ability to bring people in and come to the site. So originally we were hoping to get, you know, at least 3 a week, but we've, you know, just to be more realistic, we've reduced this down to a goal of 2 participants enrolled per week at each site. If you can get to 3, and we'd be so happy to have you do that. And then we've also increased our recruitment period a little bit to allow for, you know, all of the changes that all of us are experiencing right now. So originally our recruitment period was 12 months, and we've increased that to 15 to 18 months, and we've informed the NIH of this change also. For back home, it's a rolling enrollment. So over the course of the next 3 years, we're hoping to enroll all 3,000 participants. So all of our participants will not reach 136, of course, with this rolling enrollment goal. But we will have an assembled large cohort for potentially future studies also. So next. So the first column called under comeback milestone just gives you an idea. We're hoping that we reach our recruitment goal in March 2022. Last patient, last visit would be therefore in March 2024. And at that time, if all goes well, about 60 to 70% of our participants will have reached month 36, accounting for a little bit of loss to follow-up also. So by May of 2024, we'll be able to do data lock and commence analyses, and that's at the time our study funding ends. For the back home study, we're hoping to reach our 3,000 enrollment goal by March 2024, and then start analyses and have last patient, last visit at that time too. So next. Oh, I forgot to mention, we're in the process right now, we're starting next week, of some dry runs of the entire comeback study visit. And, you know, of course, when you do these things, you end up making a few tweaks. So we're hoping to get all the bugs out of our study visit flow before we pass it on to all of your sites. So we'll be doing that in the next month or so. And hopefully by the time, you know, we implement all the study visit measures at your sites, it'll be fairly streamlined by that point. Okay, so next. So just to reiterate, we had 2 PAB meetings already to discuss protocol and materials. We had our OSMD meeting on the 12th, and they approved our initial protocol, having our kickoff meeting today. And after the initial dry runs, I'm hoping to be able to send out the site startup packets and the equipment shipments by the end of this month, and then start working with all of your sites on the IRB reliance agreements. So then, but concurrently, I am submitting to WERB for our initial UCSF coordinating center approval, and then we'll be submitting your reliance agreements to WERB subsequent to that, and then hopefully by November 1 we'll be good to go at all of our sites, and we'll be ready to randomize. Next, thanks. So just to give you an idea of the study websites that'll be available, we're going to have a public website for both of our studies. And the comeback study will have a recruitment video, and I'll show you an example in just a little bit of our recruitment video for back home. And then in addition, for the comeback study, we're going to have a Keep Track website, which is an internal admin website that is not public. It's only available to our group and all of the clinical sites. And that's where all of your sites will be able to access your site-specific data. So you can see the data specifically for all your participants, but you won't be able to see the other sites and access that. So you can address queries on this website. We'll also have tracking reports and hopefully reports that can help you manage your participants, like visit scheduling reports and telling you when the visit windows close and open. That's where also the training videos will be from today's meeting, as well as future trainings we may do. And all of the study materials will also be available there, including any update, the operations manual chapters, all of the case report forms. And you'll also be doing the comeback date entry via this location. So we'll have more information about that in the next upcoming months as we finalize it. And then we'll be working with each of your sites to train with regards to data entry. But I'm sure most of you are familiar with REDCap, so it's it's very straightforward. With regards to back home, we'll have a public website, and that'll link to a secure sign-in page where participants can enroll in the study into the Eureka system. And that's also the place where our ongoing data collection will occur also. And there is going to be a study helpline because it's not a traditional clinical site structure. So there is going to be a phone number if somebody does want to talk to somebody. And it'll come to our UCSF Coordinating Center, and any participant can use it if they want to learn more about the study or have questions about the study if they're already enrolled at any time. So next. So just to give you an idea, the public site will be available to study participants and those interested in the study. It's a place where they can learn more about eligibility requirements, where all the clinical sites are. So we'll be profiling each of your sites here. So if there's something specific that you want to profile about your clinical site on the Comeback Study website to help with recruitment, please talk to Lucy Wu, who you all know from the invites for the study. She's managing this project, and we'd be happy to work with any of you on things that, if you want to link to another site, we can do that also. So this study website is to help all of us with recruitment, hopefully. So next. Okay, so we just wanted to give you a sample of what one of our recruitment videos would look like. So this is a video that we can send the link out to participants in an email to invite them to be in the study. It tells them a little bit about it. And we'll also have this available on our public website. So go ahead, Lucy.
Have you experienced chronic low back pain lasting 3 months or longer? Or do you have a loved one with chronic low back pain? If the answer to either of those questions is yes, you're not alone. Surveys from the National Institute of Health indicate that 1 in 5 people in the US have reported experiencing chronic low back pain, and chronic low back pain is the most common non-cancer reason for opioid prescriptions, which has contributed to the growing opioid epidemic. 1 in 5 is a lot of people living their lives in discomfort from chronic low back pain, and it's time for those people to be heard so that treatment can be better. This is Back Home. Back Home is a study being led by experts in medicine at UCSF and funded by the NIH to learn more about what causes chronic low back pain and how we can tailor treatment to the individual, and to help find non-addictive ways of controlling pain in our national effort to end the opioid crisis. We are seeking participants to join the community of back-homers who are 18 years of age or older, have experienced chronic low back pain for at least 3 months, have the ability to participate in a study virtually, and who get their medical care in the UC system at UCSD, UCSF, UC Davis, UCLA, or UC Irvine Health Centers. Participants in Back Home will enroll and consent to be part of the study from anywhere online. Then, you'll follow up with the study team periodically over the next years to let us know of any updates about your care. By being part of the Backhomer community, you'll get to share your experience in the healthcare system and provide valuable information as a patient. By learning more about the experiences of people seeking treatment for chronic low back pain, researchers will be able to develop a better global understanding of how this pain develops and how it can be better treated. As a Backhomer, you will have the opportunity to be part of our collective effort to learn more about chronic low back pain by trialing new digital tools. You'll be one of the first to hear the results of the study, and you'll have exclusive access to future studies. We hope that you'll join us on our mission to uplift the voices of those living with chronic back pain. By participating in Backhome, you can be part of the community that will help people in pain feel better. We're looking forward to hearing from you as a Backhomer. Have you?
Great. Okay, so before we go into the recruitment strategies, I just wanted to check if anyone had any comments. We're creating another video for comeback. That one was the one we finished first, so we could show that to you. But we'll also have a comeback specific video for that study. Oh, and by the way, if that website and that phone number are not working yet, we haven't released them yet. So just wanted to let you know, don't try and go do it yet, but we'll let you know as soon as they're active. Any other, if you have suggestions for anything, we'd be happy to take those too, if anyone has any comments. Great. Okay, Connor, I'll turn it over to you for a bit.
Excuse me. Yeah, thanks, Tricia. So I guess we'll dive a little bit into some of the details about recruitment strategies, and you know, this is something we could spend a lot of time on. I'm sure that you guys all have approaches that have worked for you in the past, and we can all hopefully learn from each other on how to maximize our recruitment. So, I mean, one obvious way is just the old-fashioned, you know, CRC, scouring the schedule every day or week and identifying patients that fit study criteria. So that's obviously one tried and true approach. Some other things that you know, we've looked at and we think are promising is doing medical record pre-searches, basically, to identify patients in advance of their visits that we think have identified through their care patterns in the electronic health record that they're, you know, fully engaged in the back pain care and are perhaps more likely to want to participate in a study. So we'll show some of that in a couple of minutes. Then, of course, there's the flyers and community outreach events and things of that nature that I think everyone here is probably familiar with those kinds of strategies. Next slide. So we have identified or built some processes here at UCSF to, as I said, identify some of these patients that we think are particularly likely to want to engage in studies. One of the things that we're doing is sort of working with physicians on campus to partner with them to enable us to really indicate to patients that we are working with their doctor, and you know, they sort of approve of this study and try to get patients more interested in joining the study in that way. So we've worked up some scripts and some different methods for identifying the, you know, doctors that want to work with us. You know, for example, in our institution, we have obviously our surgeons, one of whom's on the call, Praveen Mumneni, who obviously see a lot of back pain patients that we think would be good candidates for the study. We also have a large internal medicine group that actually has sort of a formalized process for how they assist with recruitment for research studies, and so we're going through their process and making sure that we're compliant with their needs for how we engage with their patients around research. So there's a variety of techniques, and these all need to be IRB approved because it's anything that's patient facing, so any scripts and so on. And Tricia, I'm assuming that we're going to have to get the IRB approval for scripts of this nature at each site. For example, this one isn't necessarily going to translate to
Right.
UC San Diego, for
So I'm
example.
going to talk about that a little bit later about how we'll go about that, but we have a template that we'll be providing to each of the sites, and then they can customize it according to your institutional needs. And then we'll get it approved through Western IRB, through the central IRB, under the Reliance agreement.
Yeah. Next slide. And one thing we want to emphasize is that our biggest hurdle in recruitment is going to be getting patients in to come back, because that's the one that has a high burden. They have to come back in for physical visits and so on. So we really want to prioritize that. But if patients that, for example, they live too far away from your clinical site to participate, or they just don't want to for some reason, we definitely want to try and get them into back home. And we can, Tricia can go through some of the details of how that flow might work later on. Next slide. So what the strategy we've come up with here, we've worked with one of our sort of IT experts in developing a search for the health system record that can be run on a weekly basis, or even more frequently if one wanted to. That enables us to prospectively identify patients, as I mentioned, and then we can contact patients. We can, if necessary, get permission from patients' physicians if they haven't provided it already. We can be more proactive about how we identify them and invite them into the study. So this is these are our searches of, basically it's the Clarity database, which I think we all of our systems run on. So there's something that could be easily adapted to individual sites if you thought that was something that may help with your particular recruitment strategy, or how your patients flow through your own location. There's also obviously MyChart emails that can be sent out. We call it MyChart here. You may have different versions of that at your sites. And then finally, there's hard copy mass mailings, and this is something that's done through either CTSI or we have another service here called Academic what's the name? Academic Research Systems, or ARS, whatever that stands for. But it's basically a way to identify patients using the electronic health record and send them out mass mailings to patients that we think might fit the criteria. I think that that's certainly a good strategy. We think that it rather than mailing out to patients that may have been seen once for back pain a year ago, that trying to do a more targeted approach to patients that are currently engaged in the system may be more fruitful. Tricia, do you want to say anything more about those different strategies?
I think, the sites will be able to manage many of this on their own if they'd like to, but with regards to the hard copy mass mailings, I know it's a big thing. I mean, when we did our initial, UCSF pre-screening search, we found up to 12,000 participants. So we're going to split those patients up into waves of mailings and then coordinate with our mailing service. So we can help you with that at the coordinating center, and we'll be taking on. I mean, as long as we get IRB approval to obtain your patient listings, we can actually do the mailings for your site and work with our mailing service. So UCSF has a mailing service that we may potentially work with, or we may be using a commercial mailing service, which we've used before for other studies. It has been really efficient and works really well. So we're hoping to, for example, the mass mailings would be a personalized letter on UCSF letterhead, for example. And then we're also planning to include like a bookmark size little flyer in there about the study. So it's something like fun that they can maybe use as a bookmark or put on their refrigerator or something as a reminder to contact us to be in the study.
Next slide. So this is an example of a report that we can run where we look at the patients for the upcoming week, and we can identify their we know that they meet the exclusion criteria, basically based on their ICD-10 codes. We know where their home or their primary care physician resides. It's truncated here, but we know what department they're showing up at. For example, whether it's orthopedics, neurosurgery, pain management, physical therapy. So those are the 4 sites that we're targeting with these, with this advanced pre-screening. So we know where potential candidates are every day, and we can try and again target our recruitment efforts to those patients. Next slide. Obviously,
I wanted to mention really quickly that once we, have perfected this here at UCSF, we'll be able to share the code with each of your institutions, so you don't have to do any reprogramming. And I already talked to, I think, UC Davis, and they work very similar to us, so we'll be able to share our code. So it saves a lot of work on your end and having to coordinate that with your individual institutions.
Flyers, I don't know, do we have any flyers made up yet, Tricia? Or are we still working on that?
They're in draft form right now, but we have an example from another study on the next.
Oh, okay, great. So here are some sample mailers and flyers. The one on the right, and I guess the one on the bottom left, are ones from Tricia's working on now with Parkinson's disease. And then we just have a rough draft of one that could be used for the back home study, for example. But the plan is to have similar type mailings or printed material that can be used for the comeback study at the various sites.
So we're hoping we can personalize it for your individual sites, and then so you'll be able to put in your waiting rooms or spread it around campus, however you'd like to use it, and that would be most effective. That would be great.
Next slide. And then of course there's community outreach events. I'm sure many of you give talks in your local community to various groups, and that would be a great opportunity to try and raise awareness of the of comeback. Health fairs, I guess I have not personally been to a health fair, but maybe Tricia, do you want to talk a little about that? What kind of luck you've had with that in the past for recruitment?
We haven't done it here at UCSF, but we've done it for some of our other studies. Like University of Minnesota does this all the time, and we have actually the Parkinson's community also does it, where they have these health fairs and they do like ultrasound or something on the spot, or their spine screening. Oh, and I was thinking maybe if we did hold one. I'm not so sure in the COVID area this would really fly. Right. But before COVID, we were thinking of this, of just having the opportunity to outreach and have a fair maybe on campus, and people would be able to reach us that way and find out about the study.
Yeah, probably fair to say that that health fair is going to be pretty low down on the list of recruitment strategies this day and age. Next slide. So Tricia, I'm going to let you go through this, but before we talk about COVID, I'd love to get some feedback from people about the recruitment strategies we've outlined. You know, what has worked well for you in the past, ideas you might have for things that we can, you know, adapt to the study as a whole. I know that San Diego, you guys have done a lot of recruitment for studies, and I'm sure Shalini and Scott have also. So any feedback from you guys at all? Or anyone can speak up.
I think all that looks good. I like the iPad or the iPad idea for.
I don't know who that was. Didn't sound like.
Sorry, Joel Castellano.
Oh, Joel. Okay, great. Okay, thanks. Is Fadl on the line by any chance? Fadl, sorry. Fadl's not there. I know he had a lot of ideas about recruitment. Shalini or Scott?
This afternoon for sure.
Oh, okay, got it. Shalini or Scott, do you guys have any initial feedback? Any or your colleagues there that things that sound good, bad, or indifferent about this recruitment strategies?
This is Joel again. I've talked to Fadl a couple times, and you know he's you know pretty clever when it comes to recruitment. He's done Google ads and kind of Facebook ads and that type of thing as well. And I know that's kind of there's hoops to jump through in terms of IRB with that stuff, but he found a lot of success with that.
Okay,
so
thanks, Joel.
Just to give you an idea, we started looking into you know, especially for the back home study, which is the online e-cohort, you know, doing Facebook ads and potentially Instagram or Twitter ads or something. The only thing that's a little bit difficult for us is because one of our eligibility requirements is that you be within the UC system. And so it's especially hard. There's no easy way to target that with an ad. So either everyone in California. So we're trying to work with them. We were hoping that they would have some solutions for us, but if anyone has experience with this, or I'd love to talk to you.
Yeah, I think that the EHR data is it's a huge advantage to have all that EHR data, but it definitely does, you know, create some restrictions in terms of recruitment. We had thought at one point that perhaps because, you know, now when we're all looking at our Epic screens, we see this Care Everywhere, at least that's what it's called here, where we can see everyone else's notes. And at one point we thought, well, great, if we can see all their notes in Epic, then that means that we can have access to those records for research. It turns out that's not the case. So really you only have, for research purposes, only have access to the data from your home institution. So it does limit some of the possibilities that I know, Joel, from talking to Fadl before, that you guys have used pretty effectively in your studies. Any other comments from any of the CRCs out there? You guys are intimately involved with this. Any feedback or? No? Okay.
This is Katie from UCSD. I actually just don't really have much more to add to what Dr. Castellanos has said, but Fadl really does have a lot of really good experience, so it would be a good idea to see if we can connect with him later on.
Okay, great.
Other options.
Okay, then I guess we'll go on to the next slide, Tricia. So you're going to go over this, right? The COVID?
Yeah, I'll just do it really quickly. We just wanted to present some ideas that we've been trying out in some of our other studies right now, because we have quite a few people that we had to put on hold pre-COVID, and then when we reopened our research back here at UCSF not post-COVID, but post-shelter in place, we contacted those participants again, and many of them said, I'd rather wait a little bit longer and see how, if the surge ends, or we're a little bit reluctant. So we've created some techniques to try and alleviate that worry, and it seems to be helping a little bit. We're definitely informing all the potential participants by phone. I think it sounds like it's really obvious to us because we're surrounded by this every day, that we have all these like safety precautions in place at our own universities, but just iterating that to any potential participant by the phone when you're trying to contact them, or sending an email outlining all of the things that we are doing to help keep people safe within our clinics, like limiting the number of patients that we have in the clinic at one time, sanitizing in between, of course, and, keeping distance even when we're in the office. Masks required, of course, or we provided if needed in our daily screenings. And I'm sure we're all doing exactly the same thing, but it doesn't hurt to reiterate that to all of our potential participants. The other thing is we've tried this recently, and it's been working out actually pretty well. We have an outdoor space near our building, so we've been arranging to meet the participant outdoors. This will only hold up as long as the rain doesn't start. But we've been, talking to the patients outdoors and consenting them and trying to complete as many of the case report forms outside in like sort of a quiet area that's private as possible, when you're on a campus. But participants seem to be really appreciative of this, and it's worked out really well. And so far we've been doing it for a couple of weeks now. The other thing we'll be doing is providing all of your sites with a study iPad. So half of our questionnaires are interviewer administered, and then half of them are self-administered. So at the follow-up visits, we'll be able to provide you with a link to email the participants with their self-administered questionnaire link so they could do it at home. But at the baseline visit, you have a captive audience when, post-consent. So we prefer that it be done at the time of the visit. So if you can just sit them in in a space by themselves to fill out the self-administered questionnaires on the iPad, that would work out well for this study also. The other thing that we're looking into is providing transportation options so they don't have to take public transportation if that is their, usual mode, like giving them a parking voucher or like an Uber voucher if they can come, and your site allows that. So just some ideas, and I'm not sure if any of you have some other ideas to add to this and what you've been doing currently on the studies that you have operating now.
This is Katie over at UCSD again. Just a quick comment about the outdoor space. Mm-hmm. I think our IRB is generally a little bit iffy in terms of doing anything outdoors, just because it could be an issue in terms of privacy. Even though it's like really quiet, anyone could basically walk in and hear what you're saying to the patient, and therefore just kind of encroaching on that.
We've been able to get this approved in the COVID era because they understand the things, things out of the ordinary are getting approved right now.
Of course, of course.
It would be the same circumstance. Yeah, but we are cognizant of that. Like if someone walks too close, we do, not talk about sensitive issues, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, but thanks. I think that's good feedback to have, just to be aware, like when we talk to your IRB about it, if we want to do this.
Tricia, can I add one additional point?
Yeah.
So one of the unique aspects of this grant is that we have no opportunity for no cost extension. So if we can't, for example, extend the study if we're slow in enrolling patients because of the way money was allocated through Congress. Whatever we don't spend after 5 years, we have to give back. And so we really have to be, pushing as hard as we can to, battle through some of these issues to try to hit our enrollment targets. But we don't have the fallback position to ask for an extension to allow these studies to trail a little bit longer because we've got a slow enrollment.
Thanks. That's a good point. I forgot to mention that earlier, that during the timeline stuff. Okay. And then we just want to, Desva will be talking about this in just a little bit when in the next presentation, but we will be providing incentives in the comeback study because it is time intensive to come in for the in-person visits. There'll be Amazon gift cards, and we'll be providing those to all of your sites and your startup materials, so you don't need to purchase them. And you can give them, disperse them upon completion of the study visit measures. Other suggestions that we have for retention that we've used in other studies is, in addition to the parking and transportation things that we've talked about, is meal vouchers. If you can do that to your campus cafeteria, or I don't know what you have on campus. For the baseline visit especially, we're looking at like 5 to 6 hours on site. So if you are able to do this and give them like a 45-minute break to go get something to eat halfway through. When we talk about the study flow a little bit, I've built that in, and we can talk about what you've done in your other studies. But if you are able to give them a meal voucher while they're, at the visit, I think that would be a huge boon, because asking them to bring their lunch or something, especially right now, may not be doable. So if you can just get something quickly from an outdoor place and then find some place to eat, it might be doable right now. The other thing we do is we keep in touch with our participants, and we send them birthday cards or electronic cards just to acknowledge that, we're thinking about them. We know they're in the study, and people tend to really like that. We do holiday cards in some of our studies also. And that's actually a little bit easier than birthday cards because you don't have to track them, and you could just do one mass mailing of holiday cards to everybody. So it's just something to think about, ways to keep your patients engaged in the study and to keep it at the top of their, on their mind. And then for back home, unfortunately, we're not able to give an incentive to everybody who participates, but one of the incentives that we are promoting is, as a back homer, you'll be invited to participate in other back pain studies and trials in the future. And we're hoping to be able to launch those in the next couple of years. The next. Okay, so after the baseline visit's complete, we just want to encourage you all to keep your participants in follow-up throughout until the end of until the end of the study in 2024. So even, if a participant has an you find out that a participant has one of the exclusion criteria after the baseline visit, that doesn't mean that they can't still be follow-up. That's not exclusionary for the length of the study. It's only an exclusion at baseline. So the other thing is, there are going to be some participants that may move out of the area and are no longer able to come in for their in-person visit. So on these case-by-case basis situations, if you can contact me, sometimes they just moved to Reno or something. We are able to reimburse them for their travel back, to the Bay Area or to your location. If it's within a reasonable range, we may be able to arrange travel funds, because each participant that we enroll of the 400, they're valuable to us for this study. So we just want to try and keep as many people in follow-up as possible, because we've made a huge investment in them at the baseline visit with all of the imaging, and to not have follow-up on these participants would be unfortunate. So I just wanted to reiterate that, many of the things that you may in other studies be considered early terminations, in our study, we should talk about it one-on-one if situations come up, to make sure that we're not automatically discontinuating follow-up on participants. And at minimum, for some people that just absolutely will not come back in for their follow-up visits, we can try and do as much of it remotely as possible by phone. Of course, you won't be able to do the imaging studies, but at the very least, we'll have some of the other measures on the during the follow-up for those participants that aren't able to come back. Okay, next. The other thing I just wanted to point out, if somebody consents and doesn't complete all of the baseline visit measures, for example, They said they could do the MRI, but then once they get to the MRI, they just, aren't able to get through it, and, their claustrophobia kicks in or something. Unfortunately, we won't be able to keep that participant in the study, and that would be considered a screen failure. So to be fully enrolled in Comeback, the participant has to have all of the baseline measures completed to be considered enrolled. Okay, next. And then just to let you know, early termination categories for, after the baseline visit include, a discontinuation of follow-up, a loss to follow-up, sometimes we can't find the participant again. In the rare case of a PI determination that, maybe this person shouldn't continue in the study, or an early study closure. So we're not calling anything a withdrawal of consent with regards to our study, unless somebody specifically comes to you and says, I would like to withdraw consent, and uses that terminology. Otherwise, we are using this terminology for the purposes of our study. So does anyone have any questions or would like to discuss this?
Tricia, maybe you could give some context for why using that specific language is so important.
Right, because sometimes when you use the language, the withdrawn consent language in your, as a part of our protocol, sometimes we do run into issues later on if somebody, instead of using discontinuation of follow-up, where the participant truly just doesn't want to come back for the month 36 visit, for example, or doesn't, doesn't want to be contacted for month 36. They're technically not withdrawing consent. They're just discontinuing follow-up. Sometimes in studies that we've in the past, unfortunately used the terminology withdrawn consent, we've had issues with the IRB saying that we're unable to use their data because there is really not a clear definition of what withdrawing consent means, meaning that are you just withdrawing consent for that from that period on, or are you withdrawing consent for the entire study? So we try to avoid using that terminology if possible, unless somebody specifically says, I would like to withdraw my consent.
Got it.
And Tricia, I have one other point. So I think what we're trying to do through our patient-facing materials is really let the patients know that this is an effort that's, a national consortium that's bigger than themselves, and they're contributing to this, once-in-a-lifetime Manhattan Project-like effort to solve back pain. So to the extent that we're, as we talk with patients, we're trying to develop materials that really kind of energizes both of these cohorts so that they really feel like they're contributing to this bigger effort. And I think that's going to be a valuable perspective for us to try to establish and maintain.
Yeah, that's a great point to be able to emphasize that when you're talking to the patients about how they're contributing to this very large NIH effort under HEAL, which is, is also contributing to the, the strategies to defeat the opioid epidemic. That might be very encouraging to people to be part of that. Okay, next. Oh, yeah, I think we're set. Does anyone have any other questions with regards to recruitment and retention? Okay, Desma.